So DeMar Derozan is one of the most interesting players in the NBA to me because he's so anti-modern basketball with his reliance on isolations and mid-range jump shots, whereas the rest of the NBA seems to be concerned with shooting as many three-pointers as you can and spacing the floor. And well, it makes sense that they would want to do that because you look at the two best teams in the league right now, or I should say the two teams that are probably going to meet in the NBA Finals, the Warriors and the Celtics, and those two teams follow those models. But DeRozan is just in this weird spot where he's very talented, but the way that he goes about getting his points, on top of not being the most all-around player, it hurts his overall stock, right? It also doesn't help him that LeBron James has clowned his team in the playoffs for a few years in a row now. However, I do think DeRozan has a chance to rewrite his career a bit now that he is on the San Antonio Spurs. And I think when you start to look at DeRozan and the Spurs and the way they both operate, they actually have a lot of similarities. Now, of course, you got to start with Gregg Popovich, best head coach in the league, with all respect to my Celtics and Brad Stevens. So, the first thing I want to address with DeRozan on this Spurs team is that they're kind of a match made in heaven in terms of play style, because the Spurs have been leading the NBA in mid-range jump shots for a minute now. At least I'm going to assume they are without doing any actual research, but I do know that they are towards the bottom of the NBA in three-point attempts, and they've still been pretty damn successful through Popovich's use of ball movement and player movement, just being one of the most sophisticated teams in the NBA, right? No matter what the personnel actually is. And I think DeRozan is going to be involved in sets that he was never really in with the Toronto Raptors, to where we could see him in more mismatches. He could just generate himself some more open baskets, and he wouldn't have to take as many contested mid-range jumpers, which, even if he's pretty successful with them, they are still very inefficient shots. If we remember his time with Toronto, it wasn't until this previous season that they started actually moving the ball around, and you know that's not going to be the case with the Spurs. DeRozan is going to have way more easy baskets, so that's going to be huge for him. Next thing I want to look at with the Spurs is their ability to develop players. You look at Manu Ginobili, right? Now, we've grown accustomed to him fitting into San Antonio's style so well because he's been there for so long at this point. But we remember when he first got to them, and he was this young dude, came from overseas, he was kind of a gunner. And if he never ended up on San Antonio, I wouldn't be shocked if he would be like an inefficient, high teens, low 20s kind of a scorer. Similar thing for Tony Parker. I mean, it's pretty well documented that Tony and Gregg Popovich came to blows a few times when he was younger because the guy was not a natural point guard. He thought the best way to go about things was for him to dominate the ball, and then, sure, he'll pass the ball off, but it's only going to be like in an assist situation, right? Then you give him a few years under Popovich and being in the Spurs system, and suddenly he's still able to be himself, but it's dialed back enough to where it's efficient and it leads to winning basketball. And I think that could help out DeRozan, because his playmaking has been a criticism. I mean, this last season with Toronto, he got his assists up there, and I think he has a chance to build on that now with the Spurs. And I think what's interesting is this team doesn't have a Tony Parker or a Manu Ginobili type of perimeter player who's going to control the offense like that. I mean, DeJounte Murray is here, but I don't think he's at that level. But also, if we're talking about development, what about Kawhi Leonard? I mean, if he ends up on the Indiana Pacers, sure, I'm sure he still ends up being one of the better two-way players in the NBA, but does he get to the level that he has gotten to? I would have to think that he does not. And the Spurs are definitely deserving of credit there. Now, one thing is, as Kawhi was improving, he was a lot younger than DeRozan is, so I'm not expecting DeRozan to make some jump into being one of the 5 best players in the NBA, but I do think this all matters. The San Antonio's ability to take guys who don't totally fit or aren't all the way talented, and you give them some time and suddenly the product is a lot better. Now, that's all on the offensive side of the floor. Defensively, there is some reason to think that he could have a tough time because he's never been a good defender. And the weirdest thing with DeRozan is because of his athleticism and size, you would think that he can at least be just not bad, but a lot of the time he has been below average. What I would say to that is Gregg Popovich has managed to have this team be great defensively with Pau Gasol as his center. And pretty much all he does is he has Gasol back up on pick and rolls and protect the rim. And none of that sounds that crazy, but if it was easy to be a good defensive team with centers who can't move, then everybody would do it. So, could we see a similar effect on DeRozan? Well, he's going to have to commit to it, but I would hope that if he really buys into playing defense, then Popovich can get him to a level that he's never gotten to, and I'm not even acting like he's going to be one of the better defenders in the league, but just get to being decent is what I think would be fair. Now, if we can get to the three-pointers, I mean, it would be amazing if DeRozan ended up knocking down threes consistently, but I don't think he has to do that to still improve a bit as a player. It's just a matter of rounding out the all-around game. Now, I recognize that the Spurs team doesn't have the most shooting in the world, and that could be a problem, but I am going to trust that Popovich can figure it out. And I do think Popovich could end up being the best thing for DeRozan. He became about as good as he was ever going to be on the Raptors, and now that he's in a situation that has consistently improved players, he has the best coach in the NBA, I think there's a chance DeRozan could take a pretty big leap this season.